in about 2 minutes. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. It's 5:05 and the Facebook Live is on. First, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and being here to observe Yom Hazikaron together. Yom Hazikaron is Israel's Memorial Day, where Israelis and Jews in the diaspora honor the thousands of people who have given up their lives for the state of Israel. At Penn Hillel, usually we have commemorated this with having a traditional ceremony with candles and memorial prayers and student reflections. And that's what we're going to be striving to do today, despite not being able to be here together physically. And I see this as a really, really great way to get together as a community before the end of the year and remind ourselves of what it's like to commemorate something together and observe something together, even though we've been robbed of a few holidays this year. So just a brief outline of the event. First, we're going to have Bar Castro, who is a freshman from Haifa in Israel, who's also a former IDF soldier. He's going to talk to us about the country's experience with Yom Hazikaron. And then we're also going to have an opportunity to listen to the siren together, followed by 3 short student reflections and traditional memorial prayers. And we'll finish the event off with Hatikva, as is traditionally done, sung by one of Penn's really talented students, Drew Korn. This will be short, and we hope that you guys find meaning in it. And we're just going to go ahead and get started and handing it off to Bar.
Hi guys, Bar here. Can you all hear me? Perfect. I'm going to talk a bit about Yom Hazikaron. I'm right now in Haifa in my house. Well, for you, it's still Yom Hazikaron. Here, we already moved on to Independence Day. I already had my barbecue and all. So it's kind of strange to go back like 24 hours ago, but we'll do it. I'd like to first mention the name. So in Hebrew, it would be Yom HaZikaron Lechalelei Ma'arachot Yisrael V'Nifgaei Pa'ulot HaIva, which means literally not only remembering the soldiers and also like people who before the IDF fell for Israel in conflict, but also soldiers and civilians who died in terrorist attacks. Many people tend to forget that. That kind of makes this day a bit different from other memorial days in any other place around the world. Also, one thing that kind of makes this unique here is I think the Israeli people take this day very, I would say, very, with all of their hearts. It's a very great day here. Well, now there's barbecue, but during Yom HaZikaron, it's not like many other countries who kind of celebrate it. Here it's very like businesses closed and people spend their days going to visit graves of people they know, their friends, their relatives. Since we're such a small country, it's very likely that you know someone or you have a family member who died or maybe a relative or you just honor your friends' relatives, something like that. We have here the siren, which I assume you will hear very soon. it's a time for us to like give a moment of silence in respect. It's very special to see, for example, if you're on the road in Israel and the siren starts alarming, everyone will stop their cars in the middle of the road, get off their cars, and just stand and respect this day, because it's a very, like, it would be very disrespectful to not take part of this day in Israel. When I was in high school, we had like a big ceremony every year. We had like thousands of people coming every year. We did a march. The entire senior class would go. We had like a big football field. We'd do a military style march with drums and like horns and everything you would expect from a military style march to remember. And once I got into the army, I saw how they kind of handle it there. The army actually sends soldiers to graves of soldiers that may not have a family left or may not have people to visit their graves. So they're kind of doing an extra effort to make sure that every soldier is remembered and every soldier is honored in this day. There's another special event in this day that kind of marks the end of it here in Israel. It's called the Teges Adlakat HaMesorot, which is like the torch lighting ceremony. It happens at night. It's kind of like the transition into Independence Day. And basically it happens on Mount Herzl, where all the greats of our nation are buried, and all the politicians and the army personnel and the families who lost children or husbands, military cripples, they all arrive. It's aired on TV, and what they do there, they have this special ceremony where you have 12 torches, and you pick like 12 special people from Israel who represent like some type of achievement. They're pretty like a diverse group as well, and then they light those torches in respect. And there's like a whole event around it. In the end of this event, it's kind of like the end of the transition, is where everything changes 180 degrees, and this entire country just becomes like a huge festival, street festivals, like in all of the big cities in Israel. Tons of artists who play for free on like improvised stages in like squares and around towns. And well, now it's looking pretty different in the face of Corona. So like all those ceremonies I talked about, they're all like pre-recorded, aired on TV, and nothing like physical. Also, another big deal is, well, they're closing, like they closed all the military cemeteries. So all the families that usually like visiting their son or their husband's grave used to be what kept them going throughout the entire year. So they couldn't have that in the usual way this year, which was definitely not easy. One of the things we have to handle due to this situation, but I do believe it is for the best. Other than that, yes, well now, as I said before, like we just had our barbecue. Now it's festival time. There was fireworks just a short while ago, but I will let you make your gradual way into that day on your own pace. So yeah, that's about it. Back to you, Avidan.
Thank you. Thank you. We are next hearing from Melissa Adler.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yom Hazikaron begins each year at sundown when a siren is sounded across the country for 1 minute. Everybody stops what they are doing, including cars driving on the highway, and observes the silence to show their respect and remember the fallen. That evening, the official state ceremony to mark the start of Yom Hazikaron takes place at the Western Wall, the Kotel, in Jerusalem. Unlike in many other countries, Israel's wars have taken place at home, and being a small country, Almost everybody knows someone who died in the country's wars, making Yom Hazikaron an incredibly personal time of remembrance. The following day, a siren sounds for 2 whole minutes at 11 a.m., and again, the country stops to remember. Following this, memorial ceremonies take place across the country to remember the country's fallen. That evening, between 7 and 8 p.m., another state ceremony takes place, this one at Mount Herzl, Israel's National Military Cemetery. This ceremony marks the end of Yom HaZikaron and the beginning of Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, a day which contrasts dramatically to what preceded it and a strong reminder of the price Israel has paid and continues to pay for her independence. As Jews in 2020, we have so much to be grateful for when it comes to the existence of the modern state of Israel. Most of us have no memories of a time when Israel did not exist. A significant number of us also have no living memory of a time when Israel last fought an existential war in 1973. As a result, it is only natural that many of us take Israel as well as its existence for granted. The existence of Israel, of a Jewish state, which we all know, especially in an age of growing anti-Semitism, is a safe haven, is as much part of our reality of our everyday lives as the cup of coffee most of us have in the morning. But the Yom HaZikaron sirens, which stop everyone in their tracks in Israel, are there to remind us that this reality is nothing short of a miracle. That while it may be our normal, in the history of the Jewish people, it is very plainly a new normal, a normal which we should never take for granted. Please feel free to stand up, turn your cameras off, do whatever measures you feel comfortable with as the siren rings. Now let us listen together.
All right, so now we're going to transition into student reflections, first from Ali Kamate, then from Justin Greenman, and then from Hannah Wahlberg. Thank you, Melissa, for introducing.
The best part of going to Jewish day school through 8th grade was arguably our 2-week trip to Israel in May. I knew I was changing schools for high school, so for me it meant the last bonding experience with my grade. When we left, I knew that my grandfather was dying of kidney failure. During the first few days, when we were in the desert, my mom called me and told me that he had passed away. I felt a really strong sense of community then. Indeed, my connection to my grade and the trip grew stronger because I was not going to be with my family while they grieved. My grade therefore became my extended family. The trip continued, and we spent Yom Hazikaron in the north, on a kibbutz. Having just lost my grandfather, I felt the sadness of the whole country even more so. This day is often hard for Americans to understand. Most of us can't even name a relative or a friend that serves in the US military. Israelis, on the other hand, can often name multiple friends and/or relatives that have died fighting for the right for Israel to exist. It is therefore interesting in Israel that the saddest day of the year is then followed by the happiest, Yom HaAtzmaut. I've never seen Israelis sadder on Yom HaZikaron or happier than on Yom HaAtzmaut. I remember being confused by this sudden transition in 8th grade. I felt like I understood it better when I was in Israel on these days as part of my gap year. On Yom HaZikaron, I visited Mount Herzl and saw many family members by their relatives' graves when the siren went off. The whole country paused for a full 2 minutes. Afterwards, my friends and I wandered through the cemetery and paused when we heard family members sharing stories so that we could listen. The rest of the day passed slowly. At night, the entire country's mood changed. There was excitement in the air. On Yom HaAtzmaut, many families barbecue in the parks across the country. My program also hosted a barbecue, and we even got to see the air show in Tel Aviv. Despite the similarity of the barbecues, it sharply contrasted how Memorial Day is celebrated in America. On Memorial Day, people in the US celebrate a day off from work by going to the beach. Very few people even recognize the significance of why we get the day off. Growing up, I never felt a connection to Memorial Day, and I still do not now. I do, however, feel a strong connection to Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. I am grateful for the times I've spent in Israel during these holidays because I experienced the country at its saddest and at its happiest. I am now starting to understand the beauty of the juxtaposition of these days, and I hope I was able to share a little bit of why with all of you.
Growing up, Israel was both a significant and absent part of my Jewish identity. I never visited Israel until I got to Penn. My parents have never visited. My Reform Hebrew school growing up in New Jersey only mentioned Israel in the biblical sense, and the creation of the modern state and its existence, its struggles, its crises were never part of any curriculum there. Yet I knew what Israel was, and I thought I understood why it was important. Here was a place that Jews across the world could turn to after the dark days of the Holocaust. Here is a place that Jews can turn to today. Here is a place that shows the world that the Jewish people are strong. But what makes Israel strong? For that matter, why is Israel even there? Now, the political scientist in me will ignore the complex and divisive geopolitical questions for the sake of time, and instead ask why has Israel survived in the face of so much external pressure from its neighbors, the UN, most of the world. We know of the 6 Days War, the Yom Kippur War, the War for Independence, but I never dug beyond these conflicts until I first heard of Yom HaZikaron. Like the rest of my Israel education, it came to me at college here at Penn when I came to a Hillel celebration much like this, though obviously in person, my sophomore year. The celebration followed my trip to Haifa for a Penn Global seminar, and after I experienced this. This is an image of a tank at the Reali School, a high school in the city of Haifa and its adjoining military academy. 2 Israelis my age, if not younger, who went to the school died in this very tank during the First Lebanon War. And the school keeps it on their military academy as a monument and a reminder to their current students and the rest of the students at the Reali School. Looking at this tank last year, I was moved by the monument and what it said about the Israeli spirit. At my public high school in New Jersey, if a student died in a drunk driving crash, the school would put his or her smashed car in front of the high school as a reminder of the dangers of drinking and driving. But this monument is not meant to dissuade, as my monument at my high school was. Instead, it is meant to honor all those Israelis who every day sacrifice their lives so that the state can remain strong. Experiencing this monument and then experiencing the celebration cemented my understanding of Israel's strength and its character that is unrivaled across the world. I would like to dedicate this Yom Hazikaron, if I can, and all others, to all of the Israeli reality school students who saw this tank and see this tank every day and still fought for their country. Thank you.
Michael Levin was 22 years old when he was killed in southern Lebanon during Israel's war with Hezbollah in 2006. Michael grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia. He was a longtime camper at Camp Vermont in the Poconos, the camp I too grew up at, and was active in his US-wide chapter. Michael grew up with a strong love of Judaism, and he was known by everyone around him as a passionate Zionist. His maternal grandparents were both survivors of the Holocaust and passed on to him a legacy of pride and strength in his Jewish heritage. From the age of 15, Michael knew he wanted to graduate high school and make Aliyah. His motivation came in part from his grandfather, who fought in World War II, and from his strong feelings towards Israel, which he formed on an 8-week Alexander Muss High School in Israel program. After graduating high school, Michael attended Nativ, USY's year course in Israel, and in his Nativ yearbook wrote the words that would become his motto: "You can't fulfill your dreams unless you dare risk it all." In 2003, at the age of 18, Michael's dream came to fruition, and he made Aliyah. He moved to Kibbutz Tirat Tzvi and studied Hebrew before enlisting in the army. Like all Israelis, Michael was drafted into the IDF and reported to the Army Induction Center at Tel HaShomer. As he was being processed, the officer in charge noticed his papers had not been finalized due to his new status in the country. The officer told him that he couldn't be drafted at this time. Undeterred, Michael went outside the Army Induction Center and climbed up a trash dumpster and snuck into the second floor of the building. When the officer discovered him, he hollered at Michael and said, "No one can get through the front door here without papers." To which Michael smiled and replied, "What makes you think I came through the front door?" The officer pulled some strings and arranged for Michael to be processed as an Israeli soldier. The passion embodied by Michael was something the officer had never seen before. He later remarked, "I've been here at the Army Induction Center for 20 years, and some kids don't want to be here and look for ways to get out. But Michael was the first kid I ever met who broke in to be inducted into the IDF." Michael quickly worked his way into an elite paratrooper division. At the end of their basic training, the paratroopers go on a 90-kilometer march to Jerusalem, where they receive their red berets at Ammunition Hill, a famous battle site from the 1967 Six-Day War. Michael described the day that he received his red beret on that hallowed ground as one of the happiest of his life. Within the first year of joining the Army, Michael rose to the rank of first sergeant, with hopes of becoming a career officer. As a lone soldier with absolutely no family in Israel, Michael was given leaves to visit his family in Philadelphia. 2 weeks before he was killed, Michael was on a visit to the United States. When asked how he felt about going back to fight, Michael said he was going back to do something that he believed in. This was his choice, and it was his dream to serve and be in Israel. While home, he heard about the outbreak of the war in Hezbollah, and he decided to end his trip and return to Israel to help his unit, showing how passionate of a fighter he was. Michael went straight to his commanders and demanded to be sent up north to defend Israel against Hezbollah. 7 days later, he was killed by a sniper in a southern Lebanese village. After being notified of Michael's death in Philadelphia, his family immediately flew to Israel for his funeral. One of their biggest worries was if they'd be able to find a minyan for the ceremony, as they had no family in the country. When they arrived at the cemetery, the Levins saw thousands of people gathered. Michael's father was confused by the large crowd and thought that there were 10 or 15 other funerals taking place at the same time. The soldiers escorting the family told them that Michael's was the only funeral being held at the time, and all the thousands of people in attendance, most of whom had not known Michael, were there to honor their fallen son. Michael's mother, Harriet, said that about a month after the funeral, a friend of hers from Philadelphia went to visit Michael's grave on Mount Herzl. When the friend reached the burial site, she was shocked to see that there was an Israeli soldier sitting on the grave, drinking a cup of coffee with a small gas burner next to him. Thinking he was acting improperly in the cemetery, the woman asked him what he was doing there. The young soldier softly answered, "Michael was my best friend in the army, and every Friday afternoon, just before Shabbat, we'd sit down and drink a cup of coffee together and schmooze about life. Now, just like before, I come visit Michael every week just before Shabbat and drink a cup of coffee and chat with my best friend." Harriet Levin said that if Michael had been buried in Philadelphia, as she had originally wanted, probably only a handful of family would visit his grave. But at rest at home in Israel, hundreds come every week to pay their respects to the young hero from Philly with the contagious smile and the heart of a lion. At Camp Ramah in the Poconos, there is a mural of 2 Israeli soldiers and an Israeli flag waving on top of 2 hilltops. Across this beautiful painting are the words of Michael's motto, "You can't fulfill your dreams unless you dare risk it all." Having spent 9 of the last 10 summers at Camp Ramah in the Poconos, I've walked by this mural hundreds of times. His story has remained with me ever since I heard it during one of my first summers at camp. And each time I walk by that mural, I'm once again reminded of the brave soldier Michael was. I'm honored and humbled to tell Michael Levin's story, knowing he was part of the community I love so much, and knowing the passion he had to fight for the Jewish people. It is of utmost importance that I, along with the rest of the Ramah Poconos community, continue to share Michael's story of bravery and courage. He will always be a hero in our hearts.
Thank you. That was great. We are going to be moving on to the memorial prayers, which Yizkor and Emily Rachamim, which Ben and Lily are going to be saying in English and Hebrew.
You guys hear me? Yizkor Am Yisrael et banav v'benotav, hanemanim v'amitzim chaylei tzeva Haganah Yisrael. V'chol lochamei machterot v'chativot halochamim v'marot ha'am. V'chol anshe kehilot hamodi'in v'bitachon v'anshe hamishtara asher cherfu nafsham b'milchama al tkumat Yisrael. V'chol ele shenirtzechu ba'aretz u'michutz ala b'yedei hamartzichim me'organei haterror. Yizkor Yisrael b'tbarach b'zar'o v'yeval al ziv ha'olamim v'chemdat ha'gvura u'kedushat haratzon u'misirut ha'nefesh asher nispu b'ma'archa kveda. Yiyu chalalei marachot Yisrael aturei nitzachon chatumim b'lev Yisrael l'dor dor.
May Israel remember its sons and daughters, the faithful and brave soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces, and the underground fighters and the fighting divisions in the nation, and all members of the intelligence community and security and police personnel who risked their lives in the war for the survival of Israel, and those who were killed in Israel and abroad by the hands of murderers from terrorist organizations. May Israel remember and be blessed by its seed and mourn the radiance of the youth, the valor and the justified will and dedication who perished in the heavy battle. May the heroes of the wars of Israel be victorious, signed by the hearts of Israel from generation to generation. El malei rachamim shochen b'mromim, hamseh menucha nechona al kanfei shechina, b'ma'alot kadoshim teorim v'giburim, kezohar harakia mashirim, leneshimot hakdoshim shnelchamu bechol ma'arachot Yisrael, b'machteret v'tzava Haganah Yisrael, v'shenaflu b'milchamatam u'masru nafsham al kedushat Hashem, ha'am v'ha'aretz v'avor she'anu mitpaolim le'ilui nishmatehem. Lachen Baal Harachamim Yastirem Beseter Kanafav La'olamim Vayitzror Bitzror Hachayim Et Nishmotehem Hashem Hu Nachatam Began Eden Tehem Nuchatam Vayanuchu V'Shalom Al Mishkavotehem V'Tamod L'Chol Yisrael Zechutam Vayamdu L'Gor Alam L'Ket Hayamin V'Nomar Amen.
Thank you. That was great. We are going to be moving on to the memorial prayers, which Yizkor and Emily Rachamim, which Ben and Lily are going to be saying in English and Hebrew.
O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence in the lofty levels of the holy and the pure ones, who shine like a glow of the firmament. For the souls of the martyrs who fought in all the wars of Israel, in the underground and in the Israel Defense Forces, who met their death in war and pledged their souls to the sanctification of God's name, the Jewish people and the land of Israel, by virtue of our prayers for the ascent of their souls. May the merciful one therefore shelter them beneath his wings for eternity, and may he bind their souls in the bond of life. The Lord is their heritage, yet in their place of rest. May they repose in peace on their resting place. May their merit reflect on all of Israel, and may they meet their destiny in the end of days. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Ben and Lily. We're now going to watch a rendition of Hatikva by Drew Korn. As we come to the conclusion of our observance of Yom Hazikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut comes closer, I just want to say a big, big thank you to the team of students who worked so hard to make this ceremony happen, whether it was reaching out to other students or taking the time to reflect through song, prayer, and stories. Thank you so much for making this ceremony so meaningful, even when we're physically apart. And now as we look forward to Yom Ha'atzmaut, which was emphasized earlier as Israel's happiest day. We hope everyone is looking forward to celebrating at home. And we just wanted to let you know that there will be some special Yom Ha'atzmaut content on our social medias, Penn Coalition for Israel and Penn Hillel. As much as I wish that we could be together and have a big barbecue like we usually do, hopefully this is the next best thing while we're all social distancing and keeping safe. Again, thank you so much to everyone who made this happen and to everyone who is taking the time out of their day to tune in. I hope everyone is getting through the last day or two of classes and staying safe. Thank you so much.